Hello, everyone. My name is Sharon Shapiro, and I am trustee and community liaison at the Ruderman Family Foundation. And I would like to welcome everyone to today's webinar on peer support in college mental health. Our foundation is dedicated to improving the mental health and well-being of young people, and we are honored to partner with the Mary Christie Institute to produce a new report on peer support, which will be discussed in today's webinar. The first place young people turn for mental health support is usually their peers. So we were encouraged to see that colleges have expressed such a strong interest in expanding and formalizing this practice as part of an array of on-campus supports for students. As students continue to report escalating rates of anxiety and depression, we feel an urgency to understand how the practice of peer support in higher education can be expanded and strengthened to help even more students. We learned a great deal from the research for this report and are pleased to be sharing that knowledge with you today. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Marjorie Malpady, Dana Humphrey, and Dr. Zoe Raguzios for their partnership and dedication in bringing this report to life. It is a pleasure for me now to introduce Dr. Zoe Raguzios, Counseling Center Director at NYU, Clinical Director at the Mary Christie Institute, and co-author of the paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon, and thank you to the Ruderman Family Foundation. I'm happy to be here with you today. A quick agenda for our webinar. I am going to present an overview of the white paper the Mary Christie Institute just published on peer support. After me, our executive director will moderate two panel discussions. The first with Dolores Simony, director of the Center for Behavioral Health Promotion and Applied Research and at the University at Albany, and former director of Middle Earth Peer Assistance Program there. And Amanda M. Fowler, an undergraduate student who is a senior peer wellness coach in the Middle Earth Peer Assistance Program. The second panel will feature David Arnold, Assistant Vice President for Health, Safety, and Wellbeing Initiatives at NASPA, and Marcus Hodeling, Director of Union Colleges Counseling Center and President of the AUCCCD. The panels will be followed by audience Q&A, so feel free to post questions in the Q&A box. Peer support as a practice is becoming more popular and prevalent, yet there is a dearth of information, particularly around definitions, standards, and efficacy data that allow it to proceed safely and effectively. So our goals with the white paper were to provide the field with information that can help guide policy and program decisions, and provide student leaders interested in peer support with information on comparative programs and lessons learned. How did we go about this? First, we did an extensive review of the current literature. We interviewed 22 experts in this work. We conducted a survey of counseling center directors via the AUCCCD listserv, and we highlighted case studies on well-known programs to provide concrete examples to our readers. Through these methods, we report on the history of peer support, the way it is used on college campuses, the benefits and drawbacks, and the student experience. One of the first things we found out was that there was inconsistent efficacy data both from individual programs and the practice of peer support overall. The literature reflects such high variability in the outcomes that are measured that it makes comparison between programs difficult or impossible. We also learned that there are a lot of terms and definitions, and there is little agreement over these terms and definitions. For the purposes of our analysis, we defined 5 of the most commonly used programs. Peer education, such as tabling or peer ambassador programs. Peer listening, where the peer supporter's job is to actively listen only. Peer mental health support groups. Short-term mental health coaching, which focuses on goal setting. And peer counseling, which is considered to have the most resemblance to professional counseling. We issued a brief survey of counseling center directors through the AUCCCD, and we found that there was near universal interest, 95%, in some type of peer support program. But there was significant variation in terms of what programs interested the counseling service directors. 94% were interested in peer education, 63% were interested in peer listening, 57% were interested in peer coaching. Interest tended to correlate with risk perception. So survey participants were more interested in programs that they perceived as less risky. Nearly half of the directors said that lack of standardized guidelines were very important in their decision-making. That's 47%. Almost all said that the risk to students providing the peer support, 98%, was an important factor in their decision-making. A strong majority said that the resource constraints, 89%, and a lack of the body of evidence to determine best practices, 73%, were important factors. We matched up our case studies to the program types we outlined earlier. Ashoka Center for Wellbeing at Ashoka University in India has a peer education program. Lean on Me is a peer listening platform. The Support Network is an umbrella organization for peer support groups at colleges across the US. Middle Earth incorporates many of the program types we've identified, including peer coaching. And Project Let's is a peer counseling program where all the peers have also lived experience. As you can see, there is great variability between these programs, including their modality. Some are in person, some are via text, others via phone. There's variability with the training the peers receive. There's variability related to supervision from the counseling centers, through other people on campus, or even from somebody off campus. Whether the program is national or campus specific is variable. And the level of intervention they offer, ranging from passing out promotional materials to having confidential conversations about a mental health problem. In assessing these programs, we uniformly considered the following questions. Can the program help students who might otherwise seek help at the counseling center for a subclinical issue? Can it reach students who otherwise wouldn't seek help at all, like those in marginalized groups? Is it easy to implement? Is it cost efficient? Does it avoid risks to student supporters and the students that are actually seeking the support? And does it positively impact counseling center capacity? So let's talk about some of our conclusions. Peer support is in fact an essential part of a public health approach to college student mental health, because young people turn to peers when they are in distress. Peer support has the potential to help students along the behavioral health spectrum. Peer support can help with subclinical issues, reserving counseling resources for students with more acute issues. It can be an intervention that prevents small issues from getting bigger, and it can provide a bridge to care for students reluctant to seek support. But we don't have solid evidence that it does any of these things. The practice of peer support lacks common definitions, some level of standardization, and a substantial body of research showing efficacy across these programs. The burning question ultimately is, which type of peer support programs will help with which types of students with which types of problems? In our paper, we recommend for colleges and universities to make peer support part of a public health approach. We suggest that they conduct an institution-wide audit of peer-involved programs, both within and external to the counseling services. We suggest that they communicate broadly what is available, coordinate peer support efforts with diversity and inclusion offices on campus, let the students lead, and encourage the altruism students are demonstrating. And for the field, we recommend that we define various peer support types with great specificity, highlighting the differentiating properties of each. We recommend establishing standardized metrics to allow for greater comparison and benchmarking between programs. We recommend directing a coordinated research effort with the purpose of providing evidence for standards and best practices, and elevating the best practices within the domain of peer support and for each of its categories. We propose that the right next step would be to create an interdisciplinary working group of nonprofit organizations, higher education leaders, and philanthropy partners to create guidelines and articulate a research agenda. Now I would love to turn it over to Marjorie Malpede, Executive Director of the Mary Christie Institute, for our panel discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Zoe, and thanks to all of you for being with us today on this important subject. We're now going to move into two panel discussions with experts who will be talking about what Zoe laid out through their own experience. So the first panel is with Dolores Simony and Amanda Fowler, and I'll just repeat quickly their backgrounds. Dr. Simony is the director of the Center for Behavioral Health Promotion and Applied Research and senior research scientist in the Department of Educational and Counseling Psychology at the University of Albany. Dolores is the former director of the nationally recognized Middle-earth Peer Assistance Program. And Amanda Fowler is an undergraduate student and majoring in psychology, human development, and sociology at the University of Albany. And Amanda is a senior peer wellness coach in the Middle-earth Peer Assistance Program. Welcome, Dolores and Amanda. So, Dolores, I'm going to start with you. By the way, this panel is going to focus really on what the benefits of peer support are from those of you who are doing the work. So, which is both of you ladies. I'm going to start with you, Dolores, by just asking you, you've been doing this work for a long time. Why do you think that the work that you do there and writ large in peer support is so important to mental health support writ large on college campuses?
Yes, Marjorie, I've been doing the work of being the director of the Middle-earth Peer Assistance Program for about 30 years. And I've learned quite a bit over the years. And what I've learned is that there are a number of reasons why we would want to do this work. One is that there is a large body of research suggesting that engaging students in peer-to-peer work supports their behavioral, affective, and emotional development. In addition, they provide vital services to their fellow students. When we hear that students are in distress and we look at the research about what college students do when they're in distress, it's very clear that the first individuals that they would reach out to when they are struggling is their peers. So I feel that we have an obligation and a duty to train our college students when we can in mental health concerns, in addressing alcohol and substance use, in addressing sexual assault and related risk behaviors. We want to train them as generalists. In addition, we want to engage our students as part of a comprehensive public health informed strategy that we engage in on our college campuses. We really can't say that we're engaging in comprehensive prevention and intervention without engaging the very students that we want to support and work with. That said, we need to keep in mind when we train students in peer-to-peer support that they are paraprofessionals. They are not trained counselors. They are not trained psychologists, social workers, mental health counselors, mental health professionals. And therefore, the focus of our training with them should be training them to know when they should seek us as professionals in supporting the students that they identify as being at risk. So those are just some of the reasons why it's really critical to do the work that we do in peer-to-peer service.
Thanks, Dolores. I might jump right to Amanda to describe a little bit about what goes on within these peer assistant programs. Amanda, you are a student at the University of Albany, and you are a senior peer wellness coach at the Middle Earth Peer Assistance Program. I know you do a number of other things there as well. Can you describe for us the kind of work that you do?
Yes, of course. So Middle Earth has 3 tracks. So it's Peer Wellness Ambassadors, the mental health hotline, and then we have the peer wellness coaching. So I started off on the hotline and I absolutely loved it. I had a great support system there as well. But I also wanted that one-on-one aspect of meeting with students and kind of having that more personal experience. So that's why I, chose to get trained in peer wellness coaching. So that process was for 1 whole semester. We're trained in motivational interviewing. And before we start taking student clients the next semester, we have to do a final role play, which is about 40 to 45 minutes. So right now we actually kind of rebuilt the program a little bit, and students are now actually just starting to make appointments, which is exciting. And yeah, I don't know if that explained it.
Yeah, no, that's great. When we had talked earlier, you have a particular interest in this work as it relates to collegiate recovery. And that's something that I think peer work has been long established around. So talk a little bit about your work in that area.
Yeah, so I started with our collegiate recovery program, I think my sophomore year. In my opinion, collegiate recovery communities and programs are really crucial to any campus. And it's really fortunate as I see across campuses nationwide that more and more people are implementing it. As a student in recovery, our program has helped me in more ways than one. And also now being in a place where I'm able to host all recovery meetings weekly on campus has definitely led me to see the importance of peer support in that setting as well. And just kind of breaking that stigma and sharing our experiences among peers to just show that you can be in recovery in a collegiate space, which is not a lot of undergraduate students have that mentality. So it's kind of nice to see that grow as time goes on.
That's great. So Amanda, can you tell us again? It's just someone has used these programs and now someone who delivers these services. Why do you think students are so drawn to this, and how do you see this benefiting the college mental health programs on college campuses?
Yeah, so I think in both spaces that I'm a part of, it's nice to be able to go to your peers that have likely recently been in the same experiences as you have, or currently are going through those experiences. And in my opinion, you're kind of breaking a barrier that the counseling services may have or other authoritative figures. People are just more comfortable talking to their peers and just in a non-judgmental space as well. And just being able to relate to them on a one-on-one basis has definitely helped in that aspect for sure.
Thank you. So Dolores, I want to ask you a question, and Amanda, feel free to jump back in. So one of the things we've learned around peer support programs is that students tend to use them when they may not otherwise want to go to counseling, and that is beneficial in some ways, and then obviously has some implications around that, particularly students who are of minoritized identities. And I know, Dolores, that diversity and inclusion are important elements to the Middle Earth program. And I wanted for you to talk a little bit more about that, both at the Middle Earth program, but also in peer support writ large.
Sure, and I'm happy to do that. At Middle Earth, we are proud to say that we are a very diverse organization along a number of lines: race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability, age. We're very, very diverse, and actually, in fact, more diverse than our broader campus population, which in itself is very diverse. And why is that important? Because students are coming in to college campuses with more and more challenges with regard to health disparities, financial concerns, economic concerns, health concerns, and the like. So it's really important for me and for us as those who work in peer services to be able to provide the peer services by trained students who look like and have similar experiences as the students that we have who experience health disparities. I always have regarded peer-to-peer services as feeders to professional services. That is, for those students, as Amanda has said, who are hesitant to seek counseling services from professionals, the first vital step that they take is to reach out to peers like Amanda. And that is the beauty of peer-to-peer services, and that's why it's so important that we ensure that we have a diversity among our peers.
So Dolores, I should have mentioned that the Middle Earth program is one of the oldest programs in the country, which is one of the reasons we highlighted it. And you have a really robust set of resources there, and you do a lot of different things. So I know that you've become a bit of a sage in this area for good reason, and you often are consulted or asked by other universities to provide consultation. So if you could bring us through, what are the most important ingredients you'd say need to be in place in order to run these programs effectively and safely?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. Now, I could talk for days about these areas, but I'm just going to provide a highlight of some of the areas briefly, and certainly I invite anyone who may be interested in following up with me to feel free to do that. So first, what we want in a peer program is to make sure that we are clear on its focus. That is, what area are we focusing on? Is it mental health? Is it substance use prevention? Is it sexual assault prevention? Is it a combination of such? My recommendation is to train our students across a variety of areas, because when students come to peer programs or they reach out to peer programs, they don't come in with issues that are in a vacuum. They may have multiple issues going on, and it's really important to train our peers regarding multiple focus areas. Secondly, resources. It's important when colleges and universities decide to embark on delivering peer services that there is an identified director or coordinator of the service, and that is listed in their job description. In addition, as appropriate, resources such as space, funding, telephones in case of hotlines that need to be developed need to be provided to the program. So the resources need to come with that. Third, it's important to look at what kind of training program we want to provide. It's critical to provide a clear curriculum listing the areas that are covered, such as listening skills, communication skills, workshop presentation, crisis intervention, classes on diversity concerns, and classes on the major issues that college students face. Ideally, if it's at all possible, it might be a good idea to provide academic course credit to the students, or to have a clear contract for the students so they know what their expectations are and they can work toward meeting those expectations. And also a process in the event that students may be needing to be dismissed from the program. What are the criteria for that? And also criteria to provide support to students who may be working in the program and who may be triggered on some of the issues that they are dealing with. Next, recruitment, retention, and marketing of the program. They cut across some similar areas. We need to be very, very robust in our recruitment, retention, and marketing measures, and really reach students in the ways that they prefer to be reached, to provide them access to services and to recruit our diverse students that we need. We also need to retain our students. We need to provide them with rewards and support, and serve as vital steps to help them advance toward their own career goals in terms of jobs and graduate school. Next area is liability. This is something that people don't often think about, but liability is critical. We need to have an identified mental health professional who is licensed running the program, in my opinion, or a memorandum of understanding with an outside agency or the campus counseling center to provide support to the program. We need to have clear protocols for the students regarding when they should be required to contact professional assistance. For example, when there's suspicion of risk for suicide or risk for homicide, and other triggers. We have a list of such triggers in our program that students follow. And having an identified backup system of professionals whenever the services are open and in operation. And then lastly, evaluation. Evaluation is critical, especially in these times that are post-pandemic, where there are such struggles for resources. Many college campuses, leadership of such look for data to provide continued resources for services. So what we need to do in those cases is to have the data that we need to show that our program is successful and make course corrections if there's data to suggest that any interventions we're delivering in the peer space are not as successful as we thought. Thank you.
So Dolores, just last question on, we're going to move on in a minute, but on data, we had suggested in our recommendations that this is something that really needs to be worked on. The field needs more of it. In your opinion, and well, I should just ask you, what do you think about that? Can we really move forward in providing the field much more than we currently have?
Yes, I think having clear data metrics and data collection, both formative and summative data, is critical. And in addition to that, we need to develop some competencies and standards, as was mentioned, regarding the safe and effective operation of peer-to-peer services. And I'm very excited and hopeful that we'll be able to move forward in that area with your support. That's so exciting to me. Thank you.
Thanks, Dolores. You can see why we went to Dolores, probably maybe first or second when we were starting this research. A lot to unpack there. And thank you so much for providing that information for the field. Super helpful. Amanda, just one last question for you. Given your experience, would you encourage other students to become peer supporters?
Of course. I mean, it's definitely a time commitment as well, and an emotional commitment in a way as well. But as long as your program has the proper support for your peer support people, I definitely encourage students to do it. It's really empowering. It's honestly helped my own mental health too, I guess, just learning the processes and learning the resources that are out there. But definitely.
That's great. You're doing awesome work, ladies. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And I'm going to now bring on David Arnold and Marcus Hodeling. And I also just wanted to remind the audience to please put any questions you have in the Q&A box, because after this next panel discussion, we'll be doing Q&A. Would be very curious to hear your own questions. So here we go. David Arnold is the Assistant Vice President for Health, Safety, and Wellbeing Initiatives and Senior Director of BACCHUS Initiatives at NASPA. And Marcus Hodeling, Dr. Hodeling is the Director of the Epler-Wolf Counseling Center at Union College and the President of the Association of University and College Counseling Center Directors, better known as AUCCCD. Hi, guys.
Hey, Marjorie.
How are you? Hi, Dave. And Marcus, now I see you. Thanks so much for being with us today. It's great to have this conversation about this important subject. And I think, David, I might start with you. Mm-hmm. You and I have had many discussions about this, and you've been at this quite a long time, as has Dolores. You started with BACCHUS, right? BACCHUS,
yes, that's correct.
BACCUS years ago, and you're still involved in that at NASPA. So talk a little bit about BACCHUS and how that started.
Yeah, sure. So the BACCHUS Network, which was a 501 standalone C3 organization, became part of NASPA in 2014, and I was there on staff when that merger happened. But the initiative actually began back in 1975 after peer education groups like the Middle Earth Peer Education Network had started to take hold. And there was one in particular at the University of Florida that encouraged peers to talk to each other about alcohol consumption and the prevention of impaired driving. And that group, and there'll be a test on this later, Marjorie, so take notes, stood for Boosting Alcohol Consciousness Concerning the Health of University Students. Whoa. Wow, what a mouthful. Only an undergraduate group could come up with an acronym like that. Actually became sort of a national model. So even though groups like the Middle Earth Peer Education Network were also occurring during the same time, this was the model that sort of got feet and legs and started to be replicated at other campuses across the country, and a model that got shared, which is why it became a standalone organization. And that name sort of followed us around ever since. So that's sort of the history and background of BACCHUS.
Thank you. Thank you. So speaking of history, because you're a bit of a historian on this topic.
Oh, no.
No, that's great. And I was so excited to hear more about it. Give us a little bit more history on this in terms of peer support in a college setting. How did this evolve? And I think importantly, at what point do you see us at now?
Yeah, so you saw a little bit of this in the paper and what Zoe went through for everyone on the call, that they're still maintain these sort of dichotomies around where groups present themselves for peer support. And that actually is represented in our history as well. Peer education groups started with a really strong foothold in sort of that delivery of an educational message or an awareness raising for each other. Then sort of swung into this consultative area where it was really that one-on-one conversation. The only thing I think that's been lost to history is the idea of peer theater, which had its sort of heyday and presence in mid 1990s, early 2000s, of a lot of people enacting sort of skits and using that as a way to model behavioral change with groups. But that sort of across the social ecology has stayed part of our history and part of our future, in that you've got peer support groups that are working on a one-on-one level to provide that consultancy, or working on a small group level in order to do some educational change. And then you asked sort of, what do I see the future and where do I see potential? Which is really expanding this idea of getting students who are involved, like Amanda, and her telling her story about how this has like improved her capacity and her understanding and her view of the environment, in letting our peer education groups actually help change the campus environments that they are a part of. And making sure that they understand that as students, they are responsible for helping cultivate that environmental design that supports mental health a little bit further upstream than some of the other ways that we've heard talked about so far.
So I'm going to put you on the spot for a little bit, as I usually do when we talk. But David, the interest in peer support is not new, but over time, it sort of increased and waned and gone sort of up and down. The pendulum swings back and forth based on sort of what's going on in society and also college student mental health.
Yeah.
Just what's your opinion on that? And give us a quick sort of overview.
You know, and I think it's like a lot of programs that we see in the collegiate space, and this is like Marcus and I have spoken about like a ton, is you've got a lot of interest and a lot of excitement, and everybody runs to the table and they say, how can I bring this back to my campus? I'm gonna give it a shot. We maybe follow the model, we maybe skew off the road of the model just a little bit, and then we end up in a circumstance where we've got a lot of programs that are out there that are sort of there, and they're in search of that sort of grounding theory, they're in search of that grounding accountability. BACCHUS attempted to give some structure around this through training of peer educators, in which we really thought, like, what is the foundational level of knowledge that we think anybody who calls themselves a peer supporter really needs to have? And you heard some of this from Dolores as well. They need to understand listening skills. They need to be able to react in a crisis. They need to have an understanding of who they are in a diverse collegiate environment. And that's maintained. But I think the problem associated with this is that the story that also gets told is like, hey, this is a really cost-effective way of increasing capacity on campus. And I think that there are some administrators who understand that to say, great, if I invest in this, I'll get a return on it. And there are some people who hear that and go, oh, this is cheap. And I think when Marcus talks a little bit about the things that keep him up at night, I imagine it's the administrator who says, oh, I don't have to invest in this at all. It'll just return without any money or resource put into it whatsoever. And that's where we see programs that often get us into some liability situations, programs that get us into concerning situations, programs that aren't going to deliver on that ultimate resource of helping students succeed. Right.
So it may have an impact on the counseling center capacity, but it's not a good reason to do it. It sounds like what you're saying. Marcus, well, I'm going to bring you in. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Well, Marcus is going to take this. I mean, I trust you, man. Like, I know you're going to pick right up on this, but what it is like saying, oh, we have a peer support program. I'm not dedicating any staff to it. I'm not bringing in any training for it. We just have it because students will work for free.
Yeah, got it. Okay, Marcus, can't wait to hear what you got to say about this. Well, right off of what David just said, you guys obviously have your own spiel on this, but I did want to ask you a little bit about the survey. But first, let me ask, why do you think counseling center directors are concerned about peer support, and for what reasons?
You know, I think as anyone who's gone through mental health training in terms of, whether you're a social worker, psychologist, psychiatrist, you learn a lot about liability and all the things that can go wrong. And when you look at what, somebody has surgery on their ankle, there's the risk of infection, there's the risk of, okay, we may have to go back in. When you look at the risk of mental health, the outcomes where there's risk are a lot more severe, and making sure that you're taking that into account when you're launching these. And I think this can be done well. And I think Middle Earth is a great, and BACCHUS are great examples of that. Those are two that I know very well, having worked actually for Dolores years ago in graduate school. So I think there's a lot of training that goes in, and there's a lot of time and energy and investment, financial investment that also goes into it. But I think the risk there is the liability, is the fact that if it's not done right, not only can it mean there's a suicide on campus or an attempted suicide, it could also lead to people's jobs. It could lead to reputational damage. So there's a lot of things that can go wrong if not done well. And David kind of spoke to this, that people kind of hear this idea and then run back to their campus and say, let's do it. But if they're not doing it in a way where there is time and money invested, and I think a lot of administrators will see this and go, hey, this is a cheap way to reduce the cost. It actually costs more, because you need to train. You need to actually take time away from someone, whether it be a faculty member, a clinician in the counseling center, or multiple clinicians in the counseling center, and invest actual real dollars. Now, the outcome will likely be a better mental health on the campus and higher retention rates, which will actually improve the financial aspects. But it takes somebody who's able to see that.
So I'm going to go back to quote David, and then you guys can, I'll leave and you guys can just keep going. But it has to do with, first of all, thank you for that. And I think there are a lot of people in the audience that would agree with you that there are things that need to be in place before they move forward with these programs. And I think we want to talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But one of the things about this, and maybe this is kind of a bad rap for counseling center directors, is that there just is like a discomfort with paraprofessionals, right? That, it has to be restricted to the clinical domain, and everybody else really needs to stay out of it. Now, it sounds like the pendulum is swinging a little bit farther back, or back from there. And Dave, you said to me in an interview, which I love, and I wrote this in the paper, we need to get to a place where not everyone has to go to counseling, and not everybody thinks they are a counselor.
Yeah.
So you guys talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, great. Thanks for doing that. A great lobby for me and Marcus, but again, good friends. Here's the deal. And one of the ways that I exemplify this, especially in the peer-to-peer space, is that when I was going through college, turn of the millennium, if I went in and saw my RA and I said, man, I'm feeling depressed, he would have swung his chair around, sat down and be like, cool, I took half a semester of general psychology. Tell me about your dreams. Let's get all Freudian on this. Okay, we're going to describe that as too far this direction. I think today I go into that same RA and I'm feeling depressed. He's going to say, David, depression is one of my naughty words. I got to get you in to see Marcus right now. You can only talk about this with a counselor. And I think pendulum is such a great way of putting that, Marjorie, because we have swung these two extremes. And that's what we're continuing to see in this consultative space. And so when campuses are thinking about, oh, do we want to get involved in this peer-to-peer support? You probably already do. We've got paraprofessionals all across campus, and they are always going to struggle between this dichotomy of doing more than they should, because that's really not their authority, it's really not their expertise, it's really not what they're in their role for, or misunderstanding and being overly concerned about not having the capacity in this. Another example I'll give before I talk about sort of this idea of counseling is that I once spoke for a law school, and they brought me in after another presenter. And the last thing the last presenter said was, remember, you're law school faculty. You don't have the authority to talk to other people about mental health. And I was like, oh man, cardinal sin to get up on a podium and say, wow, what the last speaker said was wrong. But I had 30 slides that pretty much said the last speaker was wrong. if we follow our roles, if we stay in our boundaries, everyone on campus has a role in supporting the mental health of students. But you don't need to be a counselor to do that. You don't need licensure. I mean, I carried licensure. Marcus currently has licensure. There are appropriate things for us to do in those spaces, but we can all be part of a unique solution that's designed based around supporting mental health at an environmental level, at an interpersonal level, while still maintaining appropriate boundaries and finding the support that is available for us on campus or in the community when it's sort of exceeding those boundaries.
Marcus, I got to bring you in here. Do you agree?
I agree 150%. You know, the reality is we all have a role in helping the mental health of not only on our campus, but, you know, the mental health of the community.
Yeah.
And really all it takes is empathy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and David brings up a really good point. I think that now when we hear certain words, the immediate response is go to the counseling center. I'm going to steal a story from one of my colleagues who is a counseling center director. His partner is a faculty member at a different institution, and a student disappeared from class for a few weeks, for about a week and a half. And when they returned to class, sat in the corner, came up to the professor after class and said, "I'm sorry that I've been out of class. One of my parents died." And the partner said, "Do you know we have a counseling center on campus?" And the student just went, "Yes, I'm aware," and walked away. And when they were talking about it that night, the counseling center director said what they needed at that point wasn't a referral to the counseling center. What they needed at that point was some empathy. And that's where I think we can really hit home with this is if we just show an ounce of empathy to our students, to our colleagues, it shows that we actually care. And it doesn't mean you have to be a counselor. It doesn't mean you need licensure. It doesn't mean you need any training. What you need to be is human and show that you care. You also need to know what resources are available on campus. And you also need to know when it's getting beyond your domain. And when you need to call in for the reinforcements. And Dolores spoke to that as well. That training is going to be so important to say, this is beyond your scope. The important part with the paraprofessionals part, especially when they're students, is students don't like to show weakness. Anything less than a 99 right now is a failure. So it's going to be important to help students realize if you have to, you know, you almost kind of giving them an order to say, you almost need to check in with every student to make sure that this, you know, especially in the beginning, that you know, that you don't need to know it all, that it's okay to not know it all. And it's okay to come to somebody and say, I don't know what to do with this, because I think a student is going to be afraid to show that weakness that they don't know. And again, I think that what we really need to do is to get out of our lanes a little bit, and to broaden the roles that we all have to make sure that we all play a role in keeping our campuses the levels of mental health within a reasonable expectation.
Right.
Yeah.
David, go.
Yeah. So the immediate reaction I have to that is that one of the things Dolores said, which is to have a really clear directive for the peer support group. Like our responsibility is this, and there's a way you could look at that and think, oh, you're really being siloing around the way that we support things. But if it's being designed comprehensively in a public health model, we're not being siloed. What we're doing is we're assigning people the right roles to do the right jobs on campus and help support a holistic type of student success. And I think really, truly, and honestly, we're in an exciting time because we're asking for definitions, we're asking for evidence-based programs, we're asking for these things that used to just kind of be assumed. Well, if you just throw students together, you know, Aston says that students will be more helpful for each other than they'll ever be helpful with us as professionals, which is a lot of fun to read if you're going into studying to be one of these professionals. That interactions with faculty are going to be much more valuable than interactions with student affairs folks. God, it feels great to be a member of the student affairs community reading that. But if we're all doing our job, we're all going to get there together, rather than thinking like it's this one interaction that we're going to have in a residence hall common space that's going to make the difference for this student. No, it is layers upon layers upon layers upon layers that end up making this successful.
So it sounds like there's general consensus, we certainly learned this in our research, that peer support is something that is an essential part of a public health strategy. And Marcus, when you talk about empathy, our students have, just an abundance of empathy towards each other, particularly since the global pandemic. And some previous research we did showed that. So I think the big question that we've been grappling with is, where do we go from here? Because as Marcus said, and you saw from the survey, there's still a lot of trepidation around doing this, with most folks being, wanting to take sort of a safer route. Yet some of the case studies that we've put together will show that some of the more downstream programs have been super helpful for students. So the question is that Zoe raised is, we really just don't know. So I'm asking you guys just your opinions on what needs to happen. How can we improve this, strengthen and codify this practice, so that we can take advantage of the fact that there is this strong interest, and maybe it could in fact help with the college student mental health crisis. I don't think we have the time here to get into all of that, but anyway, I'll stop and ask each of you to sort of react.
Yeah, I mean, I'll get to. Oh, go ahead, Marcus.
No, David, go ahead, please.
Oh, well, I want to get started by saying that I've already heard a great idea. I've already seen it in this guiding paper, which is the idea of making sure that we understand what the capacities and competencies are for this group of peer supporters. That if we're going to designate a group of paraprofessionals, that we are giving them the tools necessary to be successful in their jobs. I think one of the questions I get most frequently, and Marjorie, it was something that we sort of had through, which is like, is peer education an evidence-based practice? Which to me is asking the wrong question. It's because you're not asking about an intervention, you're asking about a capacity for an intervention. Is peer-to-peer conversation at a consultancy level evidence-based? There are evidence-based programs that exist within that. But what you're really asking is, can I train students to then deploy this intervention? And those are two very, very different things that we need to research and provide some evidence to our campuses around. One is, do you have the right capacity, and can that capacity have the right competencies to be successful? And two, what are the interventions we're deploying?
Great point. And to that, you saw in the paper, there are a lot of different models you can choose that might fit the profile of your school and
Exactly.
and your resources, including some national programs like Lean On Me and the Support Network. Marcus.
I think it starts with the paper. I think this is a great jumping off point that schools can utilize and people can utilize to say, this is a good idea if done well. Then the next step, I think, is looking at the counseling center is just one part of the campus. So I think that, yes, directors are going to be more nervous. I think the next people you need to talk to are the vice presidents of student affairs, and then also the college or institution's attorneys, because again, there is a risk of liability, and you have to ask, how comfortable are the attorneys and how comfortable is the institution in implementing something that has risk? Now, there's inherent risk in anything. So we could talk about the crew team, the football team, the photography club. Anything has risk. So I think that's the first step, is what is the college willing to do? And then the follow-up questions are, what does the college want to do, and how much are they willing to invest in terms of time and resources? And I think that if you show them the data that mental health improves retention, here at Union, every year I look at how many students that were in counseling were retained percentage-wise versus how many students across campus were retained. And for the past 15 years, students who have had, and that's how long I've been here, so that's how I, for the time I've been here, every year we are at least 1 percentage point above the all-campus, and we've had a high of over 5 percentage points higher each year. So that shows, hey, counseling is working. And if we can show the same thing with peer counseling, then all of a sudden it's going to catch the eyes of board of trustee members, the presidents, the vice presidents, to say, we need to invest in this, and we'll do it the best way we possibly can. We're going to train, we're going to invest time, we're going to invest people, because it will make a difference.
Well, as
Yeah.
we think about bringing a group together to really identify what needs to be done and to provide some guidance, hope you guys are willing to do so.
I don't think you could get rid of us, Marjorie, truly and honestly. And I think what's really exciting about this, I know that we're really focused on talking about peer-to-peer support because that's the purpose of the guiding paper and it's the purpose of today's webinar, but all of this exists within a bigger context. And I hope that everyone who's here today understands that this is one wedge of a bigger circle that we're creating to make healthier and safer campuses. And we've got to ground that in community mental health and in public health models.
Thank you so much. The one thing, this is really a comment, which I do all the time. I'm supposed to be asking questions, but I will bring this up. Particularly, so you two have both been involved as students, right? As students in this work back when you were young. So what would you say just about the fact that again, it's my comment, you guys can comment on it. Keeping the student in mind, right? And we can bring Amanda into this conversation for the Q&A, but really needing to understand that this work has always started with students thinking that they needed more than was currently offered to them and maybe something different. So my last question / comment.
It goes back to what was said at the very start of this. The students are going to turn to students more often than not. They're going to turn to each other. They know each other. They eat together, sleep together. They live in some very small rooms together. They know each other better than anyone can. So it makes sense that they're going to go to each other first. And this is why this can be a model that really, really works. I do think it's important, though, to keep in mind that everyone on a college campus, for the most part, is keeping the student in mind. They're the reasons why we are here. And they may disagree sometimes with our rules and disagree sometimes with our policies, but we're also doing it in a way that, years of experience, years of understanding the potential consequences, but we're always keeping the student in mind.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm glad that you brought it up. We do this was our pathway, and so I think there's two parts of this for me. One, to think about Amanda as the next College Counseling Center director, that these are programs that cultivate this field, which is exciting. And then number two is that I hate to do this because it's like looking in a mirror in a moment. I'm going to need to call Marcus later for some actual counseling. But like, we're old, y'all. Like we are not pipeline college students from high school. We don't live in the online social environments that they cultivate. We cannot be there at the bar at 2 a.m. when they're struggling with the decision that they're making. And so part of the reason that you take advantage of the fact that peers are going to interact with each other anyway and create some models and systems of support of it is that it keeps the work that we do not only grounded in the student experience, but relevant to the student experience in a way that I'm not going to run a TikTok campaign around mental health. That's beyond my scope and capacity, but I'm going to understand the public health messaging.
David. You
Nope,
totally
can't.
could.
Marjorie, I can't. But I'm going to understand the public health models. And so when my students bring me a TikTok campaign, I'm going to say, hey, we've learned things over the last 60 years of doing radio spots. Let's apply some of that to this new type of technology, because it doesn't really matter what the avenue is. The car still drives based on the evidence that we've collected around public health model.
Guys, thank you.
That's where the relationship is. Yeah, thanks, Marjorie.
Awesome. So we are actually going to go to Q&A now. So everybody stay there. Dolores and Amanda are going to rejoin, and I am going to turn it over to the Associate Director of the Mary Christie Institute, the fabulous Dana Humphrey.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dana Humphrey. I'm the Associate Director of MCI. Okay, starting with David, a question for David. Regarding data and metrics of peer programs, what specific variables should be collected and analyzed?
Sure, and again, I hate to go back to it, but it almost depends on the intervention that you're having your peer programs utilize. So if you're using an evidence-based program and you're using peers to reference it, there are going to be quality improvement metrics that you should be looking at to evaluate whether or not the program was successful. But if you're just thinking about the success of the peer education group itself, Dolores shared a couple of these. It's things like retention, recruitment, representation of the peer education group to the campus that it serves. It's even qualitative feedback about the students' experiences that might be a little bit more subjectively aligned, but line you up. There is a national peer education study that's run out of Michigan State University that any campus is able to participate in. And as long as you have at least 3 students participate, you have access to that. That also evaluates student learning based on their participation in a peer education group program across 6 domains.
Thanks, David. Dolores, do you have anything to add? I think this question came in during your presentation.
Well, I think David was very comprehensive in his response. I would also suggest looking at the metrics around the development of the peer educators themselves. That is, their own retention, their graduation. We had done that in the Middle Earth program and found, in fact, that our peer educators, our peer assistants in Middle Earth have had higher GPAs, have won more awards than the general student population, and also had higher acceptance rates to graduate school and success in moving on to jobs. So, you know, the business of our colleges and universities right now, and it has been for a while, is retention, persistence, graduation. So whenever we can look at metrics around those, whether it be with the peers that are served or the peers that work in our peer programs and learn from our peer programs, the better we do in terms of moving our field forward in terms of peer services.
Great, thanks. Dolores, I'm going to stay with you for a moment. We've got a few questions on liability, and anyone feel free to chime in on these as well. This is a question: how do you manage liability within your programs? Is it through consent forms where students agree to contact emergency services if need? Does that cover you? The question asked, the question asker runs a peer-to-peer mentoring program, and it's a question they get from campus administrators and counseling center directors often. She says they try to include paperwork that protects us along with supervision is from a licensed counselor. Is that enough?
So within the Middle Earth program, we run a variety of different services. We run a peer-to-peer hotline, and we run a coaching program, which are the elements of our program that I believe have the highest liability. And for our hotline program, we define our hotline as anonymous. So we do not take any names. The caller ID is blanked out, though in an emergency we could be able to trace the call. And so we don't seek consent. There's no need to. And because it's an anonymous hotline, it eliminates a lot of the liability issues around confidentiality, identity of the person that we serve. In terms of the coaching program, when I was working in the Middle Earth program, we did have consent forms. We framed it in the language that our students could understand, and talked about the nature of the services and the limitations, especially drawing that bright line between what our coaching service could do, and that is to focus on a strengths-based service, and then what the counseling center did, and talking about the differences between coaching and professional counseling. And so that's how we handled liability in terms of consent and agreement to receive services.
Thank you, Dolores. We have another question on liability, so I'll try and keep these together. And this might be a good question for David, our resident historian of peer support. Regarding, this is an interesting one, regarding institutional risk mitigation, is there actually an example of how peer support activity has become a legal problem, not just a theoretical risk?
Oh, well, you don't want a historian on this, you want general counsel. Because theoretical risk is what they do. And depending on the general counsel of your institution, they may be very, very risk averse, which makes a lot of sense. There's a lot riding on council's assessment of where risk may lie in a program. That may, for larger campuses, that might involve your risk management officer. And so we in this group may be thinking about theoretical risk and actual risk very, very distinctly to institutional compliance, counsel, and risk mitigation. Theoretical is real. And that's their entire job, and I don't want to write them off. And again, to Dolores' point, it's really about what we can do to mitigate and contain the risks that are naturally part of deploying any sort of service or offering from an institution. And that's those folks' jobs. I think that a lot of us end up seeing these folks as enemies and not necessarily understanding that we're all in it for the same sort of operational success of the organization and its students. So I would recommend starting inlays with the folks that you might think might be holding you back. There have directly been instances in which paraprofessional and student paraprofessional in particular staff have overstepped their boundaries. Those examples are far more prevalent in the housing space than in this peer mentorship space that we're talking about through the counseling center that I could reference easily. So it's not that this is without legs, but again, it is those folks' responsibility to help our institutions be successful and shield us from any potential harm that we might do, which is very real, and any risk that might be carried with that. I also think that when we talk about liability, we sometimes fall into this idea that it's all just liability for the institution's like bottom line, that we're going to get sued and it's going to be a money thing. You know, what we're really trying to do is we're trying to protect students ultimately from harm that may be expressed. And so a lot of that comes back to the boundary conversation that Dolores has helped guide us through the webinar.
And if I may add something as well, in terms of discussions around liability, I would encourage attendees of this webinar to contact people who have already established programs that they might want to emulate or modify. I know that we've talked to legal counsel quite a bit, and this is a number of years ago, around the time that we first developed our academic credit-bearing courses. And one of the main reasons that we moved from a volunteer program to an academic credit-bearing course is that there are a number of liability protections, at least for our particular university and our state universities that within our system that are associated with academic courses. That is, there is a formal instructor-student relationship put into place with an academic course. And with that, God forbid, if anything were to go unexpectedly wrong, what could happen then is that the university would because it's part of a course, a listed course, there would be attorney-related protections and that type of thing because it is part of a course. So, you know, there are things like that. That's just one example. There are others that can be put into place, but always, 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 as David says, it's critical to talk to your legal counsel at your particular university to see what works best for all of you, but also consult with colleagues of programs that are already in existence. That might be a good strategy.
Thank you, Dolores and David. This is an interesting one about a type of support that we did not include in the paper. What do you think about teaching campus stakeholders mental health first aid? Let's start with the counseling center director. Zoe, do you want to talk about this? We have talked about this in a different context. That's sort of the idea of more universal training, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you know, one of the comments that David made that resonated with me is that, you know, building a peer support network is just one of the multiple strategies that we're going to use to build up what we're calling communities of care. Right? It's peers, it's faculty, it's staff, and, you know, everyone else that makes up a college community. So, you know, mental health first aid is available, it's public, people are taking it anyway. I mean, you know, they don't have to go through the counseling services to do that. We make it available when we train our RAs, we make it available as sort of a second layer of training if they so choose. It is sort of heavy on the clinical, you know, it sort of goes through depression and anxiety and bipolar disorder and schizophrenia and sort of, you know, kind of dissects things a little bit in a detailed way. And so we, you know, the first thing I say when I train any group of students is to say there's a difference between support and counseling. because I don't want mental health first aid to sort of be a message that they should be diagnosing. And so that particular training does sort of speak to, particular diagnoses. People are welcome to to take it. It's interesting. As long as they know their role, I would encourage any kind of training on mental health.
Great, thanks, Zoe. Marcus, I see you nodding your head in agreement. Do you have any comments?
Absolutely. I think, when we look at the mental health first aid or any kind of gatekeeper kind of training program, it's important to give people the language to use, as well as reduce the anxiety and fear that people feel, as well as kind of spelling out what, if you are working for the institution and you hear certain things, do you have to, are you a mandated reporter for things? In the counseling center world, we are not, if somebody comes in and they've been sexually assaulted, we don't have to go to Title IX. But if a student mentions that to a faculty member, they do. And giving them that that information in a way that they're going to understand what is privileged and what is not privileged in their conversations, but also just giving them the language, helping them ask very difficult questions, or the not difficult questions that they feel are difficult, and also recognizing that not everything needs to be fair. If it's a faculty member who a student is asking for an extra day for an assignment, it's okay if they've been struggling to say, you can have this extra day, without saying, well, if I give you the extra day, everybody else needs to get an extra day too. So it's just little things like that I think mental health first aid will, or any kind of program like that will be really beneficial.
Thank you. We have a bunch of questions on training. So I'm going to ask a few questions of Amanda and Dolores about your experience, and I'm going to kind of try and condense these. So Amanda, starting with you, what did the training look like? What did the process of training look like, not only in terms of initial onboarding training, but also continued professional development activities? And then also, just kind of add on to that, was there cultural humility, cultural awareness included in your training?
Yeah, that was definitely a huge part of our training. I remember prior to starting our training, we would have to pick a track. So if we were going to the hotline, we would have a separate lab to train for the hotline, which would be like a round robin role play group where we meet with the lab leader and practice like 3 hours per week on top of our 3-hour training class. So it is, like I said, a big time commitment with Middle Earth, but also very needed. Throughout the training class, we would get trained by, I think, graduate interns, and we would learn about like different cultures, disabilities, sexual identities, and all of those kind of elements. And we also completed the NASPA modules as well throughout the semester, which was definitely a huge help. For the peer wellness coaching, that was an additional semester on top of the general training. So you have to do an additional semester of motivational interviewing training. I don't know if that answers the question.
That's great. And I'll just ask a quick follow-up for you. What did you like most about the leadership of your program? Did the supervisory style work for you and keep you excited and ready for peer counseling throughout the semesters? I think this is a common theme we think about with peer support, that you really want to keep like the student energy involved in these peer support programs and not have them become too top down. Could you speak to a little bit about that in your experience?
It's hard to pick a favorite, honestly. The leadership roles in Middle Earth have been amazing. I mean, starting with Dr. Chimini, of course. I mean, I think she left the semester after my first training semester, but just having that connection and having the opportunities that, she's made for me has been like, I'm very grateful for that. But also like the supervisor for each individual track and semester that I've been in has been really supportive. I think in peer support, sometimes we forget that we're also peers who need support, which can be complicated and can kind of make it messy sometimes. And in my experience, the supervisors have made a space for us to be able to share that in our meetings and take time for that and take space for that. So I feel like that's like a really huge part just to take away, just to make sure you're supporting the students who are also supporting the students, which can kind of get forgotten about. But also the leadership in Middle Earth particularly, I'm on the executive board, which includes about 6 more students. So it's nice having to take on leadership roles within that organization and have that again on the students, because it is our work that we're doing, and it's obviously helpful to have amazing supervisors, but also to have that responsibility and outreach in our own university to kind of, I guess, reach out to different orgs as peers too, instead of just having the adults kind of take on that. Well, I mean, we are adults, but you know, the adults.
Thank you, Amanda. Dolores, back to you for a question or two. Is there a protocol for Middle Earth when a peer counselor or peer coach oversteps a boundary?
Yes, we do have protocols in that regard. What we do is we start with the training program to embed in a class lecture discussions of ethics and discussions of boundaries, and also discussions of what if a particular topic triggers me? What if I'm taking a hotline call and I'm triggered by the topic? What do I do? And so we encourage our students to let supervisors know when they're struggling, when boundaries are potentially going to be violated, that type of thing. Sometimes students recognize that and they let us know that it's difficult for them in that regard. Sometimes students can't tell when they're violating boundaries, and most of the time when we sit down with the student and we explain and talk about the boundaries and the ethics, they say, oh yeah, okay, I didn't realize that was happening. Thank you so much. So most of the time it can be addressed just with a conversation. In situations where it's very, very challenging and the boundary violations continue and they may move into perhaps a potential conduct concern, we use other types of strategies, but very, very sensitively understanding that these are very young students, 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds, and part of our mission there is not only to address the boundary issues, but also to educate the students.
That's great, thank you. I have another really quick question from Patrick, who is the manager of a peer listening program at UNC Chapel Hill, which is accessible via live chat. Their program started in spring 2022, and they are trying to market the program. So obviously very hard to start something up. There's some concern about utilization numbers. And they aren't sure if it's due to a lack of awareness or if students just aren't attracted to the chat modality. Looking for a point of comparison for evaluation and quality improvement. Dolores, could you talk a bit about the service utilization volume
Sure.
with Middle Earth?
Sure, I would say, especially if you're starting a program and your program is very young, be patient. Because it's going to take some time to get the utilization numbers up, no matter what the advertising and the scope of advertising we do. I would certainly encourage you to advertise within the modalities and methods that the students use, like TikTok or whatever. What we've done that's helped us increase our utilization is to actually have focus groups with students and say, where do you hear your information from? And it changes from time to time. So we do this periodically, and that's helped us quite a bit. Our students have also gone into classrooms and met with other student groups. There are a lot of things we can do. And I can talk a very long time about this, but we have limited time. So I invite you, if you like, to follow up with me. I also would like to, if it's okay, to pass it to Amanda to see if she has any suggestions as a student to help utilization and advertising.
I think just, yeah, like you said, kind of just following up with your students about it and seeing what the best way that they retain information. I know for us, like for Middle Earth Executive Board, we have to every week attend the student association meetings just to kind of give ourselves a voice and make sure that we're implemented where we need to be implemented. While also recruiting students is part of our assignments each semester. So we have to do that on our own as well.
Thank you both. Switching gears a little bit, let's start with you, David. What about community mental health paradigms as context for understanding peer mental health? The question asker says, isn't that what we should be doing? Shouldn't it only be one component to a comprehensive community mental health program?
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, great question, because we do want vice presidents for student affairs or AVPs of health and wellness at larger institutions to have this focus of saying, we're going to design something that's good for campus across the board. And when you look at behavioral health issues and you think about the shared risk and protective factors of those behavioral health downstream outcomes that we're trying to prevent or get ahead of, there are some shared correlations up here, which is why having a community mental health praxis and a designer who is responsible for that work is so important. But you can't ask Marcus to do that and be head of the counseling center and supervise 3 clinical interns and run a peer education program. So really, it comes down to capacity. And again, I mean, I feel like beating the drum again, but it's about making sure that the people in the roles have the right competencies to be able to understand this correctly, that they're deploying the best evidence possible, that they're talking to their peers at like institutions, and that we are thinking about this from a higher level paradigm, not just what intervention can I drive off the shelf to do one thing. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk about community work again, because it really is the success, and where possible, and truly and honestly, now we're adding really a zany variable to the mix. If you could be working with your community as well for some town and gown work on this, that's where we can be really, really successful. But boy, asking Zoe to go work with New York Public Health, I feel like not like a good friend of this panel in this moment. But that really is the ultimate success for a lot of especially land grant institutions across the country.
Great. Marcus, I wondered if you have anything to add to that. I feel like I'm like moderating a presidential debate. Your name was mentioned. Would you like to a rebuttal?
No, he's spot on. I mean, I think a lot of us, given this post-pandemic world, speaking back to the chat feature, if you look at the various telehealth agencies that offer video, phone, chat tends to be the lowest utilized one. And I think that's because, and David kind of mentioned this before, now we're going back and forth mentioning each other's names, but we tend to, these students are on their technology all the time. And having that face-to-face opportunity that they can get from some services, and whether it be a student, whether it be even the tabling event, it's face-to-face, and that's something that they don't have. Now, some students and some administrators might be afraid of the face-to-face interaction, let alone making a phone call. But the reality here is, doing this at a community level, and I love what David said, even the community, we need to have our MOUs with our hospital. We need to have a general understanding of what the expectations are on both sides. The only way that mental health across our domains it's going to be addressed in an effective way is if we do it from a comprehensive and a community-based approach.
Yeah, definitely couldn't agree more. And I think we talked about that, incorporating peer support as a public health, part of a public health plan. Going to Zoe for a moment. This is an audience member wrote, one of my favorite social work professors used to constantly remind us that the first step in helping someone in distress is empathize and validate. I think this is so important to teach students and colleagues to do this. Do you have any idea on how to effectively teach this?
Yeah, I think that comment came up after Marcus's example, that when a student shared that they lost a parent, that the faculty member said, do you just go to the counseling service? Which is it was a disappointing moment, because it was an opportunity for that faculty member to show empathy and merely support the student, which is really different again than providing professional counseling. I think that these things, not everybody in our community is going to be beating down the door to take this on. We've heard from faculty for a long time that they already have day jobs and that they're not overly interested in taking on mental health. That being said, there will be enough champions that it will start slow and build as people understand that we're not expecting them to, we're not training them to be mini psychologists. And as they start to hear from their colleagues that really all students need is for you to just listen to them, is for you to just be human, is for you to just acknowledge that you too sometimes have hard times. You too have failed sometimes. And it really goes a long way. And sometimes, and not to state the obvious for my mental health colleagues, is that sometimes it actually goes more of a long way than anything we could say to them, because
Right.
they really want to be like these faculty and, be experts in these other fields. And so, and the same with peers, we hear from students all the time that they think they're the only ones who ever struggle. And so to have another peer say, even somebody that you might think is sort of the perfect peer with the perfect, extracurriculars and the perfect grades, to hear that they struggle as well is just so important. And I think that these things will grow as we build some champions and train them and get them out there, and people start to see that this is something that can work.
Yeah, and if I can just jump on Zoe's comment, because I think that's so brilliant. And this is such a great example for us, is that we spend a lot of time in the mental health space talking about deficit models, like what happens when a student's not doing well. But you've just exemplified how a faculty's mentorship can actually be a protective factor and help increase somebody's thriving quotient on campus. And that's exactly what these peer-to-peer programs can be doing too. So I know that we're all broken as people, and we get stuck in this like deficit model. But really, if we're doing our jobs right, we need to spend just as much time thinking about how we build up the majority of students who may be thriving at our campus, or the strong percentage of students who may be thriving at our campus.
I think that a lot of faculty, and anyone outside of mental health, they fear that they're going to say something wrong. Or, I've had many faculty say, is it okay to say this? So we kind of, when we started doing our trainings with faculty and students and coaches, we ask, when is the time that you've struggled? I want you to write it down, that you've really struggled. What did you need? What is something that somebody could have said to you that could have helped you? And then I push back and say, okay, would you be okay saying this to a student? And I think I've had one person say no in all the trainings we've done, that like, oh, this would make me uncomfortable. It wasn't offensive. It wasn't inappropriate. They just didn't feel comfortable saying it. Usually it's that empathic response that, I'm sorry you're dealing with this. I'm sorry that you're struggling. What can we do to help you? And again, it goes back to that community approach.
Thank you, all three of you, and Marcus for ending with that, teaching someone to think about how to use empathy. I think that's great. All right, we have a couple minutes left, and there is a big chunk of questions on data. So back to data for a moment. I'll just quickly read this. I supervised a peer program for several years. We created our own homegrown brief intervention program. We evaluated it with an IRB study. We pursued ourselves. In addition to our student affairs roles, ultimately unsustainable. What are your thoughts on finding ways for research faculty to be willing to partner to evaluate these programs so an evidence base can be created? I wonder, Dolores, you have a lot of experience with evaluating Middle-earth. Do you want to start?
Yes. Oh, thank you so much for calling on me, because I am now in a faculty position, and part of my portfolio is to continue to work in the space of supporting college students and enhancing their mental health and well-being. And so I, like you, have conducted studies on brief interventions and peer delivery of brief interventions. And I would encourage us to continue that work, because one of the things that we don't know a whole lot about is what is going to sustain the skills of our peers in terms of delivering the services they provide. We are getting a good sense of what strong training programs should be like, though we need to look at connecting competencies to those. But what about the ongoing supervision that peers need, for example? One study that we did a number of years ago suggested that over time, the skills that we train our peers on tend to deteriorate unless we provide weekly supervision to them. And not only that, but to have them record themselves, to view videos of themselves,
Mhm.
and talk about how they've responded in different situations. So I think there's a lot that can be done in terms of measurement and data collection in the training and supervision space. It's something that's really undiscovered in some ways. And I would be delighted to hear from any colleagues about ideas for collaborative research across institutions, because I'm in a space now where I can do that. So thank you.
I also want to offer as an answer to this question that part of what we need is we need an investment in research. We need, because a lot of where research is being funded in collegiate mental health across the board are providers of some sort of service that's a third party, maybe app or program, and they're really funding research to see if their program works. It's about product sustainability rather than about some of these nuanced questions. Like Dolores said, if anyone's got a good research question, she's eager to do it. But you're going to get to a point, Dolores, where you have no more capacity. Like we could sit at a table and come up with millions of research questions. We need to get, and I mean, like, listen, I'm living for the heyday. I'm ready for some FIPSI grants. Like, let's make some like significant federal investment in trying to figure out where best practices are, how to turn best practices into scalable practices, and how to get all of that out into the field, whether it's peer mental health support, design-based mental health support of campuses, or just having a better understanding of the field. And that's what we need. So if you've got a friend in Congress, like, now's your time. You've been sitting on it, like, get them to authorize some like federal action, because that's what our country needs. That's what our campuses need.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll say not just with peer support, but with every public health intervention on college campuses. Related note, and I promise this is not a planted question. Someone actually did ask this, so I'll just direct it to Marge to close us out with the last question. It sounds like you have a plan to conduct more research into the efficacy or different modalities of peer support. How do you plan to do that?
Ooh. Yes, you didn't see that I wrote that in? No, just kidding. So that became our conclusion when we talked to all of these fabulous experts and did our case studies, was that what we really need is to connect the dots in the field around this and get a group together to identify, as we've just discussed, what we can do, how it could be funded, the scope of which is extremely complicated and large. But what we had recommended at the Mary Christie Institute is that we start with a national working group that includes, and again, I haven't officially, pushed them towards this, although I think you could tell by my questions that I would love to include them and many others in this field to come together and really identify what it is that this field needs, again, to be codified and strengthened, so that we can set a plan forth to begin a research effort, begin a set of guidelines around protocols like training that the field would, I think, greatly benefit from as we move forward in either supporting these programs or doing them ourselves in some cases on campus, but making sure that they fulfill their promise of really helping students help themselves in very safe and effective ways. And I think that we've heard today that we have a lot of work to do before that happens.
Thank you, Marge. Okay, we have reached time. I just want to thank you so much to all of our speakers. It has been so incredible to have you here with us. And thank you to our audience members to sticking around with us for a 90-minute webinar. I know that's a long haul, so thank you so much and have a great day.